On a sweltering morning in 177 AD, a 15-year-old slave girl named Blondina was dragged through the suffocating darkness beneath the Colosseum. The stone corridors reeked of blood, animal waste, and human terror. Above her head, 50,000 Roman citizens roared for entertainment, their voices vibrating through the walls like thunder. Blondina had 3 days left to live, and what would happen to her in those 72 hours would send shockwaves through an empire that considered itself invincible. But here's what your history teacher never told you. What happened to Blondina wasn't an isolated incident, it was standard procedure. For 2,000 years, historians have carefully sidestepped the full truth about what happened to captive women in the arena. Your textbooks show you gladiators locked in heroic combat. Museum plaques describe architectural marvels and engineering genius. They'll tell you about the retractable awnings, the sophisticated drainage systems, even the 28 elevators that lifted wild animals from the underground hypogeum. But they won't tell you about the ritual that happened before every single game. They won't explain why archaeologists abruptly stopped digging in 2019 when they found something so disturbing beneath the Colosseum that it briefly made international headlines before mysteriously disappearing from the news cycle. Let me paint you a picture of Rome in 100 AD. On the surface, it was marble and gold, temples and triumphal arches, the beating heart of civilization. But that civilization was built on an empire of human misery that historians bury in footnotes. 60 million slaves, that's the number scholars estimate. 1 out of every 3 people in the Roman Empire wasn't a citizen, wasn't even considered fully human. They were property. The Colosseum could hold 50,000 spectators in cushioned seats arranged by social class. It had 28 elevators, a retractable awning operated by a team of sailors, even a sophisticated drainage system for when they flooded the arena for mock naval battles. But it also had holding cells, dozens of them, carved into the limestone bedrock. And most of them didn't hold gladiators. Female captives filled these cells. War prisoners from Germania, Britannia, and North Africa, criminals whose crimes included being Christian, refusing an arranged marriage, or simply being in the wrong place when Roman soldiers came raiding. Every single one of them was about to face something worse than death, because death would have been mercy. For decades, historians obsessed over the gladiators. They analyzed their weapons, their training regimens, their diets, their celebrity status in Roman society. Meanwhile, they glossed over what happened in the tunnels below with sanitized phrases like entertainment for the masses and preliminary spectacles. But in 1952, an archaeologist named Giovanni Carbonara found something while restoring a collapsed section of the hypogeum. A piece of graffiti carved into the stone, 6 Latin words that, when translated, read, "They took her screaming." Mars, forgive us. Mars was the god of war, not mercy, not forgiveness, but war. What could be so horrifying that a Roman citizen, someone from an empire that crucified thousands and thought nothing of it, felt compelled to ask a war god for forgiveness? The answer is recorded in legal documents, church records, and the journals of Roman writers who witnessed it firsthand. And I promise you, you don't know where this is going. The Romans had a legal term for it, damnatio ad lupanar, condemnation to the brothel. But this wasn't some separate building across town. The brothel was the arena itself. Before the main events, before the gladiator fights that everyone remembers, before the animal hunts, the guards would bring out the female captives. Roman law, specifically the Lex Julia Divii Publica, classified certain women as infames, disgraced, without honor. Once you were labeled infames, you lost all legal protection. All of it. The crowd knew exactly what was about to happen. Vendors sold wine and honeyed dates. Families ate lunch. Children watched, because this wasn't hidden, wasn't shameful, wasn't happening in some dark corner. It was scheduled entertainment, listed on the program. If you're still watching this, you're someone who believes we need to confront history's darkest truths instead of sanitizing them. Make sure you're subscribed, because next week I am covering what Roman soldiers did in conquered cities that modern textbooks describe with the phrase standard military occupation. It's not standard, it's nightmare fuel. Hit that subscribe button now, because the truth matters, even when it's unbearable. Now here's what nobody tells you. This was legal entertainment. The Roman Senate didn't just allow it, they regulated it. They had officials who scheduled it, specific days designated for it. The Ludi Romani, the great games held every September, always included what they euphemistically called preliminary entertainments. We have names, we have accounts. Tertullian, an early Christian writer who lived in Carthage around 200 AD, wrote an entire treatise called De Spectaculis describing what he witnessed. He attended the games and was forced to watch as women were given to gladiators as rewards. Records from the Spartacus revolt in 73 BC mention that one of the rebel demands was an end to these practices, suggesting this had been standard procedure for over a century before the Colosseum was even built. One woman refused. Her name is lost to history, but Tertullian records her story. When the guards came for her, she fought back. She injured two guards badly enough that they needed medical attention. The arena officials made a decision. They would make an example of her using Rome's most infamous execution method, and what happened next reveals the true genius, if you can call it that, of Roman cruelty. The execution method had a name, damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. But that phrase doesn't capture the theatrical horror of what actually happened, because the Romans didn't just throw people to wild animals. They staged elaborate productions where mythology and murder became the same nightmare. The Romans loved their myths, the stories of Hercules and Perseus, of gods and their victims. But they had a twisted innovation. What if we made the myths real? They created fatal charades, theatrical reenactments of mythological scenes where the violence was genuine and the victim actually died. And female captives were the preferred performers for specific myths, myths involving violation and violence. The Roman poet Martial, writing around 80 AD during the inauguration of the Colosseum, describes a performance of the myth of Pasiphae, a queen who, according to legend, was cursed to mate with a bull. In Martial's account, they dressed a female prisoner in costume and brought out an actual bull. You might think that's metaphorical, that I'm reading too much into ancient poetry. But Josephus, the Jewish historian who witnessed the games held by Emperor Titus, confirms it. He writes about watching a woman in the role of Dirce, a mythological character who was tied to a bull and dragged to death. Josephus specifies that the woman's cries were genuine, as was her death. The Colosseum had a pulley system specifically designed for these performances. Archaeologists have mapped the underground machinery. They were platforms that could lift set pieces and people from the hypogeum to the arena floor. There were trap doors that could release animals at precisely timed moments. This wasn't crude barbarity. This was engineered spectacle with stage managers, set designers, and costume departments. One inscription found near the Colosseum lists job titles, including Besti Arius for animal handler, editor for game producer, and this is the chilling one, ornator, which scholars believe means costume specialist for fatal performances. The woman who refused the preliminary ritual was dressed as Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from the gods. Zeus chained him to a rock where an eagle ate his liver every day for eternity. The Romans recreated it. They chained her to a post and released a trained eagle. It didn't kill her quickly, that was the point. Tertullian writes that she endured 3 attacks before finally succumbing. The crowd watched for hours. They ate, they cheered, they placed bets on how long she would last. Then came March 2019. Workers were repairing a collapsed section of the Colosseum's foundation when the ground gave way. Beneath the foundation, they found a hidden chamber. Inside were human remains. 173 skeletons, all female, all showing signs of trauma, all dating to the Colosseum's active period between 80 and 300 AD. Dr. Alessandro Giovannini led the excavation team, and what they found shocked even veteran forensic anthropologists. The patterns of skeletal damage suggested repeated, systematic trauma over extended periods. These women hadn't died in single events, they were held long-term. Bone analysis revealed malnutrition, healed fractures suggesting they survived previous injuries and were kept alive for future use, and specific trauma patterns consistent with restraints. DNA analysis showed these women came from across the empire: Germania, North Africa, the Middle East, Britannia. The age range was 12 to 30 years old. 12. Multiple skeletons showed pelvic changes consistent with childbirth or late-term pregnancy. Dr. Giovannini's team published their findings in October 2019. Within 2 months, the Italian government classified the burial site. The full report was supposed to be released in 2020. It still hasn't been published. One skeleton, labeled Subject 47, had something clutched in her hand. Her bones had fused around it. It took forensic specialists 3 weeks to carefully separate them. It was a small wooden cross, roughly carved, about 2 inches tall. Carbon dating confirmed it was 1850 years old, the same age as the skeleton. This woman died holding a symbol of a religion that Rome was actively trying to exterminate. She died as a Christian martyr, and that brings us back to Blondina. On the first day, they bound her to a post and released animals. The animals wouldn't touch her. On the second day, they tried the preliminary ritual, but a gladiator named Marcus refused to participate. He was executed on the spot. His refusal inspired to other gladiators to refuse as well. The games descended into chaos. On the third day, they scourged her with 40 lashes, placed her in a red-hot iron chair, then finally put her in a net and exposed her to a bull. But Blondina's defiance created a political crisis. Within 25 years, Emperor Septimius Severus issued reforms restricting the use of female criminals in these spectacles. It wasn't enough, but her story spread. By 325 AD, Emperor Constantine had converted to Christianity and banned the fatal charades. The Colosseum, once Rome's greatest symbol of power, became a symbol of everything Christianity opposed. 173 women in a mass grave. Blondina and countless others whose names we'll never know. Today there's a plaque on the eastern wall of the Colosseum that reads, "In memory of the nameless victims whose suffering is written in these stones." The Italian government still hasn't released the full archaeological report. Here's my question for you. Should modern Rome officially apologize for what happened in these arenas, or does the distance of 2,000 years absolve responsibility? Let me know what you think in the comments below, because acknowledgement matters, even across the centuries.